Hi everyone, welcome back to Hoopsa. FPL 23-24 is officially live, so in today's video I'm going to be talking you through my first draft and the players I'm considering for game week 1. If you like what you see, hit the subscribe button, and if there's any players you think I should be considering, let me know in the comments below. So starting off with goalkeepers. I've actually picked two goalkeepers outside of the top 3 from last season. Raya of Brentford, of course, topped the goalkeeping charts in FPL last year, closely followed by Alisson and Pope. But I've gone for Pickford and Leno, and there's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, both of them have pretty good fixtures. They're actually playing one another in game week 1. The second point is that they both come in at 4.5 million, so Raya is sitting at 5 million at the moment. I would normally go for him. I've had him in my teams for the last couple of seasons, but I do think he's going to be moving on, so that's sort of holding me off from putting him in for game week 1. Obviously, he was heavily linked with going to Spurs, so I may reassess if he does end up there, but I wanted to start off with two keepers at a decent price point. I didn't want to absorb too much budget on my first draft. You're maybe thinking that Pickford is probably a strange choice, given that Everton were nearly relegated last season and many expect them to be in a relegation battle again this season. But he did keep 8 clean sheets for Everton last season, and now that Dyche is in and he's going to have a full summer, if Everton are anything like his Burnley teams, I expect them to be a lot more defensive next season, so I'm hoping that the clean sheet numbers might be a little bit higher. Everton's opening fixtures are Fulham, Villa and Wolves as well, so I quite fancy those as the first 3. I picked Leno of Fulham because, again, he's got that 4.5 million price point. Fixtures are good again: Everton, Brentford, a tougher game in Arsenal. One of these is going to be a reserve keeper anyway. Despite the fact that both keepers were out of the top 3, they were actually both in the top 3 for saves made last season, so definitely promising choices. Moving on to defenders, so my first choice is Gabriel of Arsenal, sitting at 5 million. Gabriel was the 4th highest scoring defender in FPL last season. Arsenal's opening 3 fixtures are Forest at home, Palace away and Fulham at home, so I really fancy a couple of clean sheets in there. Gabriel was 10 points behind Ben White last season, Arsenal's highest scoring defender, but he's actually $500,000 cheaper, so I think he's the better choice here. My second choice in defence is Ben Mee. He was actually the 5th highest scoring Premier League defender, just 3 points behind Gabriel last season. Brentford have got some decent fixtures to start the season, so they've got Spurs at home, which might be trickier, but I think playing at home will definitely give them a bit of an edge. They've then got Fulham away and then Crystal Palace at home, so Brentford were really solid last season. Obviously, Raya potentially being on the move might sort of throw that into question a little bit, but I think he's a good choice to have in the squad for the opening weeks. My next choice in defence is Brighton's Estupiñán. I think this is a really obvious choice and definitely one that's going to be popular amongst FPL players. He had 1 goal, 7 assists and 10 clean sheets last season, so definitely some good attacking value there as well as the defensive side. He also started 31 games, so he's pretty nailed on, and I'd expect him to be a main feature of that defence this season too. And some good fixtures to open: Luton at home, Wolves away and West Ham at home. So my next choice is Luke Shaw, 5.5 million. Shaw scored 1 goal, had 4 assists and 12 clean sheets last season. There was a spell after Christmas where Shaw was really solid, and he definitely dropped off a little bit sort of March onwards, but I think he's a really solid choice. I think the 5.5 million price point's really attractive. Some good opening fixtures: Wolves at home, Spurs away and Nottingham Forest at home. I think there's a possibility that United will sign another centre-back or a defender over the summer to really shore up that defence, and I think that will benefit Shaw if that does happen. My last choice is Newcastle's Botman at 4.5 million. I cannot believe that he's 4.5 million. Newcastle obviously had one of the best defences last season, and I really expected pretty much all of them to rise in price. Trippier has the 6.5 million, and for me at the moment that sort of prices him out to being in my team. But having a Newcastle defender at 4.5 million is an absolute steal, so I think a lot of people will be picking him and having him in their team. I'm not that keen on their opening fixtures. They've got Villa at home on the first day, which is not bad. They then do have City away and then Liverpool at home, so I don't really see many clean sheets in any of those fixtures. But I think he could be a good bench option, and they have a really good run of fixtures afterwards, so it might be worth having him in there on the bench. So I'd say the big omission in defence at the moment is not having Trent in there. At the moment for me, just that £8 million price mark is sort of putting me off him a little bit. Obviously, Trent came really good at the end of last season and started to be shifted into that midfield role. I know Gareth Southgate's been experimenting with that with him for England as well, and he obviously produced some good results in the qualifiers that he played. So there's probably a fair chance that Klopp's going to push him into midfield. If that's the case, depending on what happens over pre-season, I may put him into my team. They do have Chelsea on the first day of the season, and we don't really know what that Chelsea team's going to look like. Obviously, new manager, they're going to want to get off the mark well. So I think for me, Trent might be one to watch, but that could well change by the time the season rolls around. Moving on to midfielders, I actually found the midfield the easiest to pick out of this whole team, and I think it's because there's a lot of players at good price points, and maybe some players haven't sort of increased to the prices you'd expect them to. So starting off with Odegaard and Saka, these are two players that featured in my team for the majority of the last FPL season, and they were the first two names that I picked. They're both £8.5 million each, so they've both had price rises. But Odegaard scored 15 goals and had 8 assists. And Saka scored 14 goals and had 12 assists, so there's incredibly good value there for the money. They've not reached that sort of £9.5 million, £10 million mark, which I expect if they have another brilliant season, then they're definitely going to be reaching that next season. But I still think these are really good prices for these players. As I said with Gabriel, they've got really good opening fixtures, starting with Forest at home. I think these are two players that you have to have in your team. Next on to Matoma, again a player that's going to be very popular this season. Matoma scored 7 goals and had 9 assists in 24 starts last season, and definitely had, you know, an incredible breakout for Brighton. Brighton being the sort of club that they are, selling players on for high value at the moment, they're definitely going to want to have him in the limelight. And I think they're going to be able to command a really high price for him, so I'd expect to see a lot of Matoma this season. Pretty good opening fixtures as well, with Luton at home, Wolves away and West Ham at home. The £6.5 million price point's pretty good. Another player I was considering at the same price was Abireze. I obviously sang his praises in previous videos and he ended the season brilliantly. Not so keen on his opening fixtures. I know they've got Sheffield United, Arsenal and Brentford. I think these are going to be quite tricky games, and you do wonder if teams might suss them out a little bit more, so at the moment it's Matoma for me. Next up is Rashford at £9 million. Rashford had an absolutely brilliant season, particularly after the World Cup. He scored 17 goals and had 7 assists in 32 starts. Again, I would have expected Rashford's price to increase a bit more here, but it hasn't, so he's straight into my team, good opening fixtures, and I don't think that he'll be a player that will be leaving that starting lineup for me. And finally in midfield, probably the player that I'm most unsure on at the moment is James Maddison. So he's £7.5 million, obviously Spurs' new signing. I expect he's going to be, you know, a central figure in that Spurs midfield. I think the thing that's most attractive for me at the moment is that we're expecting the new manager to play 4-3-3 as he's done at previous clubs, plays very attacking football. And if they do convince Kane to stay, then that's 4-3-3, Maddison in behind Son, Kulusevski and Kane. If they are going to play this attacking brand of football, then you'd expect Maddison to be getting a fair amount of assists, and for the £7 million price, then I think that could be a really good choice. It's the fixtures that are sort of making me question it at the moment. They've got United to play in the first 3. We don't quite know whether they're going to hit the ground running yet. There's also the possibility of putting Son into the team. He's actually had a price drop and he's now £9 million. He obviously struggled for form last season, but he still managed 10 goals and 6 assists. And I think again with this attacking formation, you'd expect him to be contributing a little bit more. Obviously there's the possibility that he may even sort of play up front or be the central figure if Kane does move on. You've then essentially got a £9 million striker who's going to be a central figure for Spurs. So that's something to think about at the moment. And lastly, onto the strikers. To be honest, just like Saka and Odegaard, Haaland is a must-have. Even though he's risen to £14 million, he is absolutely essential. Everyone's going to have him, so if he gets off the mark quickly, which he will, and you don't have him, then you're already going to find yourself behind in the earlier weeks. And despite being so expensive, he did score 36 goals and assist 9 last season, so you're even still getting value for £14 million. And of course, because of Haaland's high price point, that has determined who I'd pick for the other striker choices. So I've gone with Semenyo of Bournemouth, primarily because he's £4.5 million. He's going to be on my bench for the time being. And I've also gone for Wissa of Brentford. The main reason I picked Wissa is he fit the price point at £6 million, but he did score 7 goals and make 4 assists despite only starting 16 games. And obviously, with Ivan Toney now banned until the second half of the season, Brentford are obviously going to look elsewhere for goals, so it does make me think that we're going to see a little bit more of Wissa unless they go and make a big signing in the summer. Can't really see that happening because they're not going to want to replace Toney forever. So Wissa's got in as my final pick. So lastly, this is what my team looks like in formation. So I've gone for a 4-5-1. Haaland as captain with Saka as vice-captain and Lino in goal. I fancy Fulham just a little bit more because they're playing at home. Obviously, it's going to be the first of probably about 500 drafts before the first game of the season, but I quite like how this is looking so far. I think it's pretty solid. Obviously, I have just gone for 1 premium at the moment, so I think my next drafts are going to be looking at 2 premiums or 3 premiums and seeing how that affects the rest of the team. A lot of people have been talking about the fact that the prices are much lower than expected for most players, probably with the exception of Trent and Haaland. And that is true, but I think what it does is essentially just gives everyone more choice. There is a high chance that everyone's going to end up with a fairly template team, but I think those low prices mean there's going to be a lot more choice to make in those early game weeks. At the moment, I think the only players that are nailed down for me are Odegaard, Saka, probably Rashford and Haaland. I would like to look at some drafts with Trent in, with Trippier in, Son, Kane. Even Bruno Fernandes I was considering midfield because I really like the look of United's opening fixtures. And of course we don't know what signings are going to be made over the rest of the summer, so there could be a lot more choice to make by the time game week 1 comes around. Thanks very much for watching. If you like what you see, then please subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are there any players I've missed? Is there anyone you think I'm a madman for including? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to be doing a lot more FPL content in the coming weeks, so make sure you have notifications on, and I'll see you next time.